I'm a political science major at Fordham University. I'm a graduating senior who is looking to go to law school, and I'm very interested in hearing Fraidy speak tonight and what she has to say pertaining to forced and child marriages in America. I am a fellow of the AHA Foundation's campus program known as the Critical Thinking Fellowship, which has helped me to plan and facilitate this webinar. The fellowship aims to spread the ideas of their founder, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, including the topic of this webinar, as Ms. Fraidy is a survivor of an attempted forced marriage and presently an activist in the fight to end child and forced marriage. Welcome, Fraidy. Thank you for speaking with myself and some of my peers today. I would like to thank you for your time here and welcome you to the Fordham community virtually. I know there's still some concerns about the pandemic, so this event is virtual for tonight. I hope this event can serve to inspire some of my peers and to become more involved with your type of work and stirring change in behalf of ending the forced and child marriages, as this is a problem in America due to legal loopholes. And for those of you who do not know, Fraidy Reiss is a survivor of an attempted forced marriage and an activist at her organization known as Unchained at Last. And this strives to end forced marriage and child marriage throughout the United States through an advocacy-based approach. I first came across Fraidy through a TED Talk online, and I became immediately very interested in her type of work. And I also have family in Brooklyn, and this topic became more personalized to me as I learned that Fraidy grew up in an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. I believe that it is very important for more students to hear about what Fraidy has to say and her story, along with her struggles of living in this type of marriage. I know this may be of particular interest to some fellow political science majors, since this topic spans various categories, including family law to contemporary politics. And I myself did research last semester pertaining to this topic for a paper, and I'm very excited to hear now firsthand what Fraidy has to say about her own story on the matter. I find that it is especially helpful to hear from survivors firsthand when it comes to these kinds of topics. So tonight, Fraidy will be recounting her life story and why she has chosen to spearhead her movement on helping women and ending child marriage. At the end of Fraidy's story, guests will have the chance to ask Fraidy some questions, and she will answer these. With regards to time constraints and depending on how many questions we get, these may have to be limited, but please feel free. There's a Q&A chat box where you can ask questions, and I look forward to hearing what Fraidy has to say on her story. And so without further ado, I will hand it off to you, Fraidy.
All right, well, thank you. And to clarify, I'm a survivor of a forced marriage, not an attempted forced marriage. So I actually, unfortunately, was forced into a marriage. So I want to talk to you about my experience, as Julia said, and start by saying that it's been about 17 years now since my family declared me dead. And the reason that they did that, the reason they declared me dead, was I dared to escape from the abusive marriage that they had forced me into when I was a teenager. So I want to tell you about how that came about. And I want to also talk about how my experience surviving this forced marriage led me to my mission to end forced and child marriage in the United States and the work that we do at Unchained at Last for that. And so first, thank you, Julia, for your introduction. And thank you, Kara and the AHA Foundation, really, for being an ally in this really important work to end forced and child marriage in the United States. So first, my story. As Julia mentioned, I grew up in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in New York City, in Brooklyn. And for those of you who are familiar with that community, you probably understand that that means I grew up almost completely cut off from the outside world, where I had no television, no radio, no newspapers, no real contact with anybody who wasn't also ultra-Orthodox Jewish. I had to wear long, shapeless skirts. I had to cover nearly every inch of my skin. And I went to an all-girls school, where Yeshiva of Brooklyn on Ocean Parkway, for those of you who are familiar with Brooklyn. And at Yeshiva of Brooklyn, I learned how to cook, and I learned how to sew, or I should clarify, they try to teach me how to cook and how to sew. and a lot about God, but very little of the math and science and other subjects that I assume most other students in Brooklyn were learning. And in fact, when I was in high school at Yeshiva Brooklyn, I had to sign a paper promising that I was not going to take the SATs or driver's ed. Both of those were forbidden for a girl from that community where I grew up. Now, I was always kept my whole life from when I was an infant. I was always kept completely separate from boys and from men. So at any religious event or social gathering, I was always behind a curtain with the women and the girls. I was never allowed to have a boyfriend or even like talk to a boy. But I always understood, it was made very clear to me from a very young age that I was going to get married young, and that the marriage was going to be arranged through a matchmaker. So there was never a choice for me about whether I was going to marry. That was a given. That was a yes. I was not given a say in that. There was never a choice about when that was going to happen. It was going to happen as soon as possible, either 12th grade or as soon as possible thereafter, when the matchmaker found a suitable match for me. I was told that I had the choice of whom to marry, but looking back, I can tell you, I don't know that choice is the correct term to use for the way this happened. I didn't get to choose somebody. What happened was the matchmaker introduced somebody to my family, and it was really up to my mother to get that, to make that decision whether he was suitable. And then I did get to go on a limited number of so-called dates, what they call dates in that community. But on these dates, we were never allowed to be alone together. And we always had to be in a public place. And we were not allowed to have any physical contact. The average number of these so-called dates in that community is 7. So I had a matter of hours over a period of a few weeks to decide something as important as whether I wanted to spend the rest of my life with a stranger that I had never even been alone in the room with. And keep in mind, I was really young, really inexperienced. I had never been allowed to date or even talk to a boy before. And by the time it came to me, my parents and his parents had already made the decision that this was going to happen. So there was intense pressure on me not to say no. There was intense pressure to say yes, and no real reason to say no. And there was also the added pressure of, I knew what would happen. Technically, I could have said no, but I knew what happened to the girls who said no to their match. The matchmakers would write those girls off as the picky ones and just not want to deal with them. And then I had to face the risk of turning 20 and still being single in a community where being single is considered extremely shameful. I saw what happened to the girls and women who said no to their match. They did not have a happy life. And so faced with all this pressure and really very little opportunity to say yes to this complete stranger, I said, yeah, I will marry him. We had a 6-week engagement. And during that time, we were still, he and I, never allowed to be alone together, still never allowed to have any physical contact. And then less than 3 months after the matchmaker brought this man to my house, I became his wife. By the way, I walked down the aisle on my wedding day with a big smile on my face. I thought, this is the best thing that can happen to me. I'm not going to be one of those women condemned to a lifetime of singlehood. I'm getting married and I'm still a teenager. Isn't that fantastic? And I'm sure this guy they found for me, I don't know him, but everyone around me is telling me this is the right guy for me. This is fantastic. I'm so excited about this. Well, that bubble burst pretty quickly because my husband and I turned out, I realized very quickly, to have nothing at all in common. And in fact, having a conversation was a challenge for us because we had just had such different outlooks on life that literally, I'm not exaggerating when I say having a conversation was a challenge for us because we just thought about life so differently. But worse than that, I discovered very early on that he was violent and unstable. And in fact, I discovered this exactly 1 week after our wedding. He woke up late that morning and he was furious, not at me, he was furious at himself for waking up late. So he started screaming and cursing in a way I had never heard before. and just jumping up and down in a very violent rage. Now, I was 19. This was a stranger to me. I didn't know what to do. He was a big guy, 6 feet tall, 240 pounds. I've always been small. So just physically, this was really scary for me. So I was just kind of cowering in a corner. I didn't know what to do. And then in this blind rage, he punched his fist through the wall hard enough that he left a big hole in the wall. And then he ran out and he left me standing there shaking, looking at this hole in the wall and thinking, oh my God, he did this because he woke up late. What kind of life am I going to have with him? And also, he did that to the wall. What is he going to do to me? I mean, this is a guy who clearly I could see had really violent tendencies. Well, a few days later, he threatened to kill me. That was the first time. It became the first of many threats to kill me. So pretty soon the violence, as I expected, became directed toward me. It also became very clear to me very early on. This was something I had not considered or fully understood before my wedding. There was no way out for me. I was trapped in this marriage. So what this is, and by the way, this is a fact that happens often, that it gets often overlooked about forced marriage. People who have little or no choice about entering a marriage, think about it logically. They typically have little or no choice about leaving that marriage. And that certainly was the case for me. So first way that I was trapped in this marriage, complete lack of sexual and reproductive rights. I was explicitly taught in bridal classes that I was required to have unprotected sex with my husband. And in fact, I was told that it was going to hurt because rape hurts. And I was told, use KY jelly, use a lubricant because it's going to hurt. And not so, don't worry about it. You don't have to go through with it, but use KY jelly when you're going to get raped because you are required to have unprotected sex with this man. No matter if he spent the day explaining to you how he's going to kill you, you still have to have unprotected sex with him. And what that meant was that even though I knew from the first week that this was not a good marriage, my first child was born 11 months after my wedding. Pretty soon I had 2 kids. That already makes it difficult to leave a marriage. And then I had very limited, or I'm going to say not limited, I had no financial rights. Under Orthodox Jewish law, any money I had earned, if he had allowed me to work, would have gone to him. And by the way, he did not allow me to work. He did not allow me to have a bank account or a credit card in my own name. I was not allowed to have any of my own money. He was allowed to prevent me from having that. And that meant I was completely financially dependent on him, not only for myself, but also for feeding my kids. That's something very basic. And then I had limited legal rights. Under Orthodox Jewish law, a man is allowed to divorce his wife. Sure, go ahead. A woman does not have that right. I did not have the legal right to end my own marriage under Orthodox Jewish law. Really, the only way out for me would have been if my family had agreed to take me back in as an aguna, or a woman who was chained to a dead marriage, a woman who no longer wants to be in the marriage, but her husband has not given her a Jewish divorce. But even that small favor, my family, who had forced me into this violent marriage, refused to grant me even that. And so I was just trapped. Now, I might have remained trapped forever in that marriage if at age 27, I had not done something really rebellious, which is I started seeing a therapist from outside the community. That was not allowed. And it was really difficult to arrange because I had to pay cash and I couldn't put it on my calendar in case somebody found out. I could have gotten into big trouble for doing it. So I went only twice, but that was enough for this therapist to completely change my life because she, first of all, explained to me what domestic violence is. And she's the first person who confirmed for me that, or explained to me that what I was experiencing was something called domestic violence and that I was right to be concerned for my safety and my children's safety. That was something that until then, everyone I had gone to for help had said, oh, come on, you're just exaggerating. He's just young. He has to grow up. I mean, I was young when I got married. I was 19. He was 22. He wasn't much older. So it was, well, he just has to grow up a little, he just has a little bit of a temper. You'll see if you're good to him, he'll be good to you. But this therapist explained to me, no, that's not what's happening here. This is not your fault. What's happening is domestic violence, and you are right to be concerned. And the other thing that she told me was something I had not known. And how would I know this? As an Orthodox Jewish woman with very little connection to the outside world, she explained to me that I had legal rights, that the police actually would protect me from my husband. That was something I had no idea that that was a thing. And at the time, my then husband and I had moved to New Jersey. We were living in Lakewood, New Jersey, where there's a very large ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And based on what this therapist told me, a short time later, after a particularly violent incident at home, I became, I believe, I don't know this for a fact, but I believe I was the first woman in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, New Jersey, to walk into the police department there and to ask for a temporary restraining order against my then husband. And, clearly the police were not accustomed to dealing with people from that community. A lot of insensitive remarks, did not handle it very nicely, but they did give me the temporary restraining order, and they did serve it on my then husband, removed him from our home. And that should have been a good first step toward safety and freedom. But it was not. And here's why. Here's something that I did not take into account when I was going into the police department and getting this restraining order. I had always been taught that one of the gravest sins I could commit as an ultra-Orthodox Jew was to turn over my fellow Jew to the secular authorities. That's a sin that is punishable by death. And I had, in essence, committed that sin by going to the police and getting a temporary restraining order. So I started getting phone calls from everyone I knew. My then husband was not allowed to call me because of the temporary restraining order, but instead I was getting calls from my family and my friends and my neighbors and rabbis, basically everyone in my entire world saying, have you lost your mind? What have you done? You went to the police? To give you some context, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, where I lived, like a lot of other ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities, like the one in Brooklyn and other areas, they have their own security force, their own ambulance squad. You don't call 911. That's not a thing. So they're just everyone just saying, like, you have to fix this. What in the world were you thinking? And the rabbis in Lakewood sent an attorney to my house, an Orthodox Jewish male, of course, attorney, showed up at my house. He drove with me to family court and had me stand in front of the judge and tell the judge that I wanted to drop the temporary restraining order. And I will never forget this surreal moment where the judge asked me whether I was dropping the restraining order of my own free will, which I assume is something that a judge asks anybody who's dropping a temporary restraining order. But I was standing there looking at the judge and thinking, no, I'm terrified right now. Everybody is forcing me to do this. I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. I don't know how I'm going to stay alive. My husband is telling me he's going to kill me. This is not even my attorney standing next to me. They sent this guy to my house. But there was no safe way that I could possibly communicate all that to the judge. And so in this just really surreal moment, I stood there in the court and I looked at the judge and I just lied. And I said, yes, Your Honor. But I realized in that moment, finally, it dawned on me, age 27, standing in that courtroom, I finally realized I need to find my own way out because nobody is going to help me to get out. And if I stay, this man is going to kill me. He would describe to me in graphic detail how he was going to kill me. He 100% planned to kill me. So I said, I need to get out and I need to do this myself because nobody, not a single one of my friends or relatives is going to help me. Even the police cannot help me and the courts cannot help me. I need to find a way out of this. And that was finally the day that I put a plan in place to get the hell out. Not an easy overnight escape, by the way. This turned out to be a 5-year escape plan. And the first thing I did was I started to save up cash because I realized, hey, I'm going to need some cash if I'm going to leave. I need some money. And this was not an easy thing to do because my husband was so abusive and controlling that he did not allow me to have anything private, anything that was my own. He would look through the pockets of my skirts hanging in my closet. And he would do this in front of me so that I would know that I belonged to him and everything I owned belonged to him. But there was one place I knew he would never look. A box of whole grain total in the pantry closet because he, like most human beings, does not like whole grain total. So I started using this box as a piggy bank, and whenever I had some cash, I would put it in this box of cereal. And the other thing I did was I realized I needed an education. I needed to get out. That Yeshiva of Brooklyn education was not quite cutting it. I needed an actual education so that I could support myself and support my 2 daughters and get out without, unfortunately, help from my family. So I went online, and by the way, this is before the rabbis in Lakewood banned the internet, which they later did. Yes, you heard me right. I said that they banned the internet. And so I went online and I did a search for a college in New Jersey, and I found a school called Rutgers University, which seemed like a really great school. Okay, I didn't know first thing about college, but that seemed to me like just as good a school as any other. It was the first one that pulled up. So yes, I'm going to go to Rutgers University. And without telling anybody, I submitted my application to Rutgers University. Now, I always say I have no idea why Rutgers accepted me because, to be very honest, at Yeshiva of Brooklyn, where cooking and sewing were the core subjects, I had failed both cooking and sewing. And I had never taken the SATs. I had promised. I signed that paper. So it was a pretty strange application. And maybe that's why they decided, wow, we really need to meet this woman. We need to find out what is happening here. But they did accept me. And I had to announce to my family that I was doing something no one in my family, man or woman, had ever done. I was going to college. Not a happy day when I announced this to my family. And, my mother was speechless when I told her. She couldn't even respond. She actually just was rendered speechless. My husband said, "You're not going." And I said, "Yes, I am. There's nothing that you can do to stop me." Now, Rutgers University was not an easy experience for me. In addition to having zero academic background, somehow the cooking classes I had taken at Yeshiva Brooklyn did not prepare me for college classes. In addition to that, I also had a 1-hour commute from Lakewood up to Rutgers, which is in New Brunswick, for those of you who have been to New Jersey. And I also had 2 little kids. And so I had to work my schedule around them. I would put them on the school bus in the morning and then do the quick 1-hour commute to Rutgers, and then have to get back for my classes in time to get them off the school bus. So that part was not easy. And I had a husband who almost every single day tried to get me to drop out. He was just horrified that I was getting this education, for good reason, because he knew exactly why I was getting that education. It was to become free from him. But my education, and I don't know about all of you, and some of you, I guess probably a lot of you are getting close to graduating. All of you are college students, so you can relate to this perhaps in some way. College completely changed my life. And it for the first time, I was learning new things or learning anything, let's be honest, and making friends for the first time with people from other cultures and religions and communities. And Rutgers changed me so much that during my last year at Rutgers, I took my next rebellious step toward freedom. I was feeling cocky, like, hey, I'm getting out of here soon. I can do this. And that was when I stopped wearing a head covering. Orthodox Jewish women are required to cover their own hair with a wig or some other head covering from their wedding night through the rest of their lives. And I had always hated doing that. And I said one day, you know what? I'm not doing that anymore. I went and got a haircut and drove home with all 4 windows of my car open on the Garden State Parkway, wind whipping through my hair, just loving every minute of it, and got home for my family to say, oh my God. If I can explain to you what a shock it is, it's just not done in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community for a married woman to walk outside her home without her hair covered. It's like walking outside naked. That's how much of a statement it made. And it was that day that my family shunned me. They declared me dead. And to explain the violence of a shunning, how extreme it is, I come from a large family. Both of my parents were alive at the time, and I come from a family of 6. I have 5 siblings. Each one of my siblings is married and has on average 10 children, which is very common in that community. I have hundreds of uncles and aunts and cousins and nieces and nephews, and all of them and all of my friends cut off all contact with me that day. And one of my sisters kept in touch with me briefly at first. And she told me that the rest of my family was planning to sit Shiva for me or go through the Jewish mourning ritual for me, as if I had literally died. Now, here's the really, I guess, ironic part of this. Not only had I not died, but it was really, this time was when I finally, for the first time, started to feel alive. I graduated from Rutgers University at age 27. As valedictorian of my class of 10,000. I got my degree in journalism, and with my degree, I was able to I got a job as a reporter at the Asbury Park Press, which is the second or third largest paper in New Jersey, depending on how and when you count. And I, well, first of all, also bought my first pair of jeans and my first of many, many skirts. If any of you will ever meet me in person, the first thing you will notice is that my skirt is always unreasonably short, and it always will be. And then with the help of the police, I moved out of the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Lakewood, and I moved up to Union County, New Jersey, where I bought a small house for myself and my two daughters. So I became financially independent enough that I was able to buy a small house for myself and my daughters. But I know from my experience that most people cannot escape a forced marriage on their own. Most people do not have a whole grain total box full of cash. I had more than $40,000 in my box of cereal by the time I was able to leave. And most people don't have that. Most people, like me, they have just a family and a community in many cases, or cultural and religious norms and rules that make it extremely difficult to escape from a forced marriage, especially for women, like in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, where there are that extra rule where a woman cannot even file for divorce, just makes it so difficult, but for men as well. And that's why I decided at the same time that I bought my house, I decided that I was going to found an organization called Unchained at Last to help others in the United States escape forced marriages. And Unchained at Last is the only organization that is dedicated to ending forced and child marriage in the United States through direct services and advocacy. And at first, we were focused specifically on the direct services, helping people to escape forced marriages, a marriage in which one or both parties do not give full free consent. And we provide crucial, comprehensive wraparound services, always for free, everything from helping people escape to providing free legal representation, sometimes even overseas in conjunction with the US State Department for those taken overseas for a forced marriage, everything that they need to escape either an impending forced marriage that their parents are planning for them or one that they're already in. And we have been able to date to help about 800 people in this way to escape an impending or existing forced marriage. And that felt really great, I'll be honest, to be able to take my own trauma and turn it into a force for good. But then here's what happened. More and more girls under the age of 18 started reaching out to us at Unchained at Last to beg for the same help that we were providing to adults. Please help us to escape a forced marriage, either one our parents are planning for us or one we're already in. And we realized, oh my God, we did some research and determined child marriage at the time, this is in about 2015, legal in all 50 US states. All US states allowed parents and or a judge to enter a minor child into marriage. And here's why that's so horrific. Well, I'll talk soon about why it's so horrific, but one of the main reasons that we saw at first was a minor cannot escape from that situation. If you are 16 or 17, no matter how mature you are, and by the way, a lot of states, half the states at the time allowed marriage as young as 0. But even at 17, really mature, turning 18 next week, your parents planning to marry you off or marry you off, you are completely screwed. Even if you reach out to advocates like at Unchained at Last or at AHA Foundation and ask for help, there's nothing that we can do for you, or almost nothing, because you have such limited legal rights. And I'll talk more about that soon. But the shock of it was that this marriage before 18 is just creating this completely nightmarish legal trap, and it was legal at the time in all 50 US states. So let me explain what I mean by that. Something as basic as leaving home. If you're not yet 18 and you leave home, you're a runaway. In some states, not in most states, you can be dragged back home against your will, brought right back to your parents who are planning the unwanted wedding for you, or back to your abusive spouse if you were escaping from an abusive spouse. But beyond that, we as advocates, if we help somebody before 18 to leave home, we could be charged criminally. And in some states, a minor who leaves home can be charged with a status offense for leaving home. That's an actual crime in some states for a minor to leave home. It doesn't matter if there's a forced marriage at the heart of it. So that's just the most mind-boggling, well, one of the most mind-boggling parts of it. But it actually, no, I'm sorry, it gets even worse. Domestic violence shelters. You manage to get to a domestic violence shelter before 18, you know what they're going to do? They're going to send you back home. They cannot accept you Across the United States, domestic violence shelters routinely turn away unaccompanied minors because of the legal liabilities that they bring, and often they have funding guidelines that prevents them from taking in unaccompanied minors. You think, okay, I'll retain an attorney. Attorney will help me figure all this out. No, not going to happen. Contracts with minors are avoidable. So minors cannot easily bring legal action in their own name. And then, they cannot easily retain an attorney because contracts with children, including retainer agreements, are typically avoidable. And then, I was getting on to my next point, minors cannot typically, they're not allowed to bring a legal action in their own name, which means they're not even allowed in many states to file for divorce. They can be entered into a marriage by their parent and or a judge, and then not allowed to file for divorce until they turn 18. Can you imagine this? What we're creating is a nightmarish legal trap for minors. Besides, if that's not horrific enough, marriage before 18 happens to be classified as a human rights abuse. And that's by the international community as well as the US State Department, because we know it produces devastating lifelong repercussions, specifically for women and girls. And here in the United States, we know that it destroys a woman or a girl's health, her education, her economic opportunities, even her physical safety is undermined by a marriage before 18 because it's much more likely that she will experience physical and sexual violence within that marriage, just because it happened before the age of 18. And then in case that's not all horrific enough, by the way, marriage before 18 also completely undermines statutory rape laws and completely undermines sexual and reproductive rights. So in many states, what would otherwise be considered statutory rape becomes completely legal if a marriage license is handed over. And that's happening over and over again in the United States. And in fact, what we at Unchained at Last discovered is we did a study that showed 300,000 minors were married in the US between 2000 and 2018. And at least 60,000 of those marriages occurred at an age or with a spousal age difference that should have been considered a sex crime. But beyond that, we know how easily marriage before 18 can be forced. And as you just heard with my own story, and that is consistent with the stories of the hundreds of survivors we have worked with across the United States, a forced marriage means a loss of sexual and reproductive rights, with survivors like I was forced to have unprotected sex and forced to endure pregnancy and childbirth and child rearing without their consent. So what we at Unchained at Last did when we realized this is we jumped into action. We said, all we have to do is let legislators know what a serious problem this is and then how simple the solution is. All we have to do is pass simple common sense legislation to make the marriage age 18, no exceptions. And we thought at first legislators would give us a hug and a high five and immediately and unanimously pass this legislation. Instead, what we found was in state after state, legislators said, what do we care? It's just a bunch of girls. Because almost all the minors who marry in the United States are girls married to adult men. What do these legislators care? It took us years to get the first state to care. And by the way, legislators also kept telling us, you know, I'm still just really old fashioned. I still believe if a girl gets pregnant, she has no choice. She has to get married, even if she was raped. Yes, it's always really hard to say that and then just continue talking. So I'll give everybody a minute to vomit into a bucket and then we will continue. But in any case, we continued pushing, raising awareness. We created a chain-in, which is a form of protest where we stand wearing bridal gowns and chains to raise awareness of forced and child marriage in the United States. And we've done media interviews, and I've been in films and on TV and radio and books, and we've just, written op-ed articles, and we published an article in the Journal of Adolescent Health, anything we can to raise awareness. And we partnered with organizations like AHA Foundation to push state by state for legislators to get over their initial lack of concern about girls and pass this simple common sense legislation. And I'm very happy to report that at first we thought this is never going to happen. And we all promised that when the first US state finally took the drastic step of ending child marriage, we would all get tattoos to commemorate the victory, thinking that will never happen. And actually in 2018, we all kept our promise. Here's my tattoo. It's a broken chain on my wrist, because in 2018, Delaware became the first US state to end child marriage, 18, no exceptions in Delaware. Since then, we have convinced 5 other states to end child marriage. and make it 18, no exceptions for the marriage age. And right now, if you're doing the math, we have only 44 states to go. So that is pretty good. We'll take it. Anyway, so all of you as students, by the way, you can help. New York, for those of you who live in New York just in last year ended child marriage. We finally, after we started working in New York in 2015, and it took us 6 years to convince New York to end child marriage, because as you can imagine, my former community, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, which has a lot of political sway, or at least had, came out and fought it, but we managed to overcome that finally last year and make it 18 no exceptions in New York. But I urge all of you to go to unchainedatlast.org, where we have all kinds of ways that you as students can help end child marriage, as simple as following us on social media and sharing, tweeting, retweeting, liking everything that we post to help raise awareness, speaking about it to other people, joining our events, just join our email list. Please help us raise awareness of this issue and help us build grassroots support for ending child marriage in the United States. So I will close by saying that my family thought I was trouble when I was alive, but this dead woman ain't shutting up. I promise you that we at Unchained at Last are going to continue chaining in and pushing and fighting until we end child marriage in all 50 states, and then come back for forced marriage of adults, where our ultimate goal is a world where no girl is ever again a bride, and where every adult is free to choose whether, when, and whom to marry, and whether to get divorced. And I hope that all of you will join this movement. Let's do it. It's not an unreasonable goal.
Okay, that was really great. We have a few questions. I'll start off with some of mine that I had. So how did you find hope to survive during your abusive marriage? What kind of kept you going and kept you motivated, so to say?
Well, I didn't. Until I had my escape plan, I did not have hope. And in fact, what I used to think was, best case scenario was that I die young so that I don't have to endure this for very long. So what really gave me hope, and I'm still like this today, is when things seem really bleak and dreary, having a plan, however small it is, or even if it's not even a reasonable plan, is just something that I can grasp onto. Okay, I'm going to do this. And during my time where I had my 5-year escape plan, at least I was able to focus on that. Maybe I can get out of this. Maybe this will actually work.
Yes, that makes sense. Also, since your 2018 TED Talk, what has been your proudest piece of work or reform?
Well, when I gave that TED Talk, I announced that all 50 states still allowed minors to be entered into marriage. Since then, 6 US states have ended child marriage, and by the way, 2 territories. So we have 6 US states, 2 US territories, which means, as I said, we have only 44 states, 3 territories, and the District of Columbia to go. That's not nothing.
Also, we have a question in the chat. So how do your girls, or your 2 children feel now towards your ex-husband, and has there been any contact with him?
Well, they're adults now. They're 22 and 26, so I let them speak for themselves, but certainly fraught, to say the least.
Also, I was just wondering, so as a college student myself, what would you suggest that other college students do to get more involved with this and the legislation? I just wanted to know any recommendations that you might have.
Well, so I urge you to go to unchained.last.org, where we have ways that people can get involved. And it's obviously the easiest to help in your own state. And I'm assuming that most Fordham students are New York residents, and we already ended child marriage in New York. So there's little to be done about the New York legislation. Last year, I would have said, please email your legislators. So we don't have to do that anymore. But we do have, as I said, you can just as simple as sharing, retweeting, and liking on social media. Make sure you follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and then help us amplify our message by sharing, retweeting, liking, etc. And we have, on social media, for example, we created Vomitocious Wednesdays as one of our hashtags, where every Wednesday we share some of the vomitocious excuses that we have heard from legislators for why they're clinging to child marriage. So, you can, we kind of try to have as much fun as we can with a topic as depressing and upsetting as forced and child marriage. But there are, all kinds of creative ways that we're getting the message out, and we need all of you to help amplify that. We need people to hear about Vomitocious Wednesday. Help us. Is something that was concerning for you, and I don't know if that happened to you, and I'm sure you know people that it has happened to. And I was lucky in that sense that he gave up the fight, which I expect and I suspect is probably because I have two girls and what are they worth? They're just girls. I mean, anyone with a vagina is just not worth much. So I assume it had something to do with that. Also, I was getting divorced in New Jersey and not New York. And if your experience was in New York, again, my heart goes out to you, because the divorce system in a state where judges are elected and are beholden to the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, very, very, very difficult. And I've seen some horrendous miscarriages of justice happen in New York. So just the most horrific. And as you probably know, until my experience, I didn't know anybody who had left the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community and left a marriage at the same time and won custody of their children. I did not know anyone that had succeeded in doing that. So it's something that really needs to be addressed. So, but yeah, again, I welcome your outreach. If you want to reach out to me privately, I'd love to hear more about what happened to you and see if there's some way we can help.
Okay, great. Also, another question. Have you found any mentors in your process of escaping your forced marriage, and who do you look up to?
So unfortunately, there was no Unchained at Last when I was leaving. So I didn't have anyone. I did not have a single person I could turn to for help. What I found was the people from my community, the former community, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, refused to talk to me, refused to support me in any way. Not only would they not help me, but they shunned me. They wanted to see me fail. They were not there for me. And the people on the outside, the people who were not in that community, what I found was there was no possible way they could understand what I was experiencing, the obstacles that I had to overcome to not only get out of an abusive marriage, but to get out of a forced marriage. And at the same time, to leave a very fundamentalist religious community where, I didn't have the first clue about what was happening in the outside world. I thought hamburgers were made out of ham. That's just one example of just how completely clueless I was about the world. So there was no one who could just understand all of that. And that was why I founded Unchained at Last, because I wanted to be that person for other people. And now it's a whole team for someone who's going through that kind of traumatic escape. Now there is someone they can turn to. And maybe, we have people from every community, culture, and religion you can think of who reach out to us. So maybe we don't know exactly how it worked in your community, but we at least understand what we don't understand. And we understand at least the forced marriage aspect of it and how difficult it is to get out of that. The fact that you're not just escaping from an abusive spouse in some cases, but escaping from a whole family, community, and system that will punish you if they find out you even ask for help. Now there is that system in place for those who are going through that. It didn't exist when I was there.
That's great. Also, I have another question. This might have to be the last one, but essentially, what have you learned with working with survivors, and how has that impacted you?
Well, the work that we do at Unchained at Last is tough. It is depressing. It is demoralizing. Every time you hear a legislator say out loud, "What's so bad about a girl marrying her rapist?" That can make you give up, and you could just go crazy from the sheer evil that legislators are aware now that this horrific human rights abuse and injustice is happening. They're aware of how simple it would be to fix, and they're not doing it. It's easy to give up, but it's the survivors who keep us inspired and keep us pushing and fighting. They remind us how important the work is. And they remind us of what's possible when people refuse to give up.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay, so I just wanted to say thank you, Fraidy, so much for taking the time to speak with us today and for sharing your courageous story with everyone. Your strength is truly inspiring, and to hear about how far you've come. It's also been helpful hearing your story, what you've learned, and how you overcame the difficulties in your life. I am grateful that we are left here with your wisdom on how to continue with this movement and the positive change that you have started, along with your dedication and hard work, especially with Unchained at Last, and that you were able to found this organization. I think that it's been very helpful to hear about the various ways that we could get more involved with this cause, especially by getting involved with your organization. And I'm also thankful to the AHA Foundation for making this event possible. And if you have anything else that you would like to close with, I think that would be great.
Thank you. Well, I just want to really thank you again, and thank the AHA Foundation again for being our partner and ally in this from the beginning. I founded Unchained in 2011, and from day one, the AHA Foundation has been one of our partners and allies. So we're just so grateful. And I will close by saying that there are some social injustices and human rights abuse that we all agree are terrible, but there's no easy solution. And I would put forced marriage in that category. There's no simple way to end the forced marriage of adults. And I can think of a lot of other just abuses and injustices that there's no simple solution for. But when it comes to child marriage, not only is there a simple solution that we can achieve in our lifetime, there's a simple solution that we can achieve this year. We can end child marriage in the United States within a year if we all band together and just push the legislators across the United States to do the right thing, pass this simple common sense legislation that harms no one, costs nothing, and ends a human rights abuse. Just make the marriage age 18, no exceptions. It's that simple. So when it comes to that, which we can achieve literally within 12 months, we can do that. It's achievable. And the forced marriage of adults, which is a little bit more complicated, but still doable and achievable. Let's all band together. Let's do this. Let's make this happen. Let's start with child marriage, get that out of the way, and then figure out how to end forced marriage. And then we can all live in a country where there is no forced or child marriage. How beautiful would that be?
That's great. We actually, so I'm not sure if we have time. There's one more quick question, if I could ask that.
Sure.
So would you say that acceptance of forced child marriage has diminished within the Orthodox Jewish communities over time as younger generations replace the older generations? So one of my peers wanted to know that.
Oh, I wish I could say yes to that. And in fact, if I've seen the opposite. I've seen that, as the years go on, my former community tends to keep moving farther to the right as opposed to the left, and they keep becoming more insular and just cracking down on women's rights even farther in terms of just limiting women's rights even farther. So unfortunately, I do not see that shift at all. And in fact, what I've seen is the opposite. Now, I say that as someone who I'm not in that community anymore, so I don't have a front row seat the way I did. For the first 32 years of my life, I was in that community. Now, I have only an outsider's view, and the inside view that I get is mostly from people who reach out to Unchained at Last for help, who are still within that community. So maybe I'm wrong, and I can no longer pretend that I know exactly what's happening in that community, but certainly from my perspective, I don't see that happening.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you again, Fraidy, so much for speaking tonight. And I hope that everyone here has a great evening, and just goodbye and thank you again.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, so just want to point you to Esther, who just noted in the chat that unfortunately, her perspective is the same, that it's 100% still happening and getting worse in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. Which, by the way, before we go, important to just explain, very different from the Reform or even or conservative Jewish community, and even from modern Orthodox Jewish community, talking about a very, very insular and fundamentalist group within the Jewish community. Thank you, everyone.